hope I don't lose my place. This is kind of a memorial to Jean and Lenore. Marion must have asked them to write down all their remembrances of the groceries in South Whitley. And so my program mainly tonight's going to be word for word what Lenore wrote. I've got some pictures that we found about old grocery stores to go along with it. I don't know, yep, there it is. This picture was taken in 1979. There was an award given in recognition of their many years of service to the community for businesses of South Whitley. And just a little background, Gene was born in 1907, and his father owned a grocery store, and he probably worked in the store, I imagine, a lot, even when he was a young man, because back then, that's what you did. You worked in your family business. And he helped with the family business, and the program is word for word what Lenore wrote, and that's what I've already said. Like you say, I'm nervous. I don't know when the article was written, but Jean died in 1990 and Lenore died in 1998. So starting now, it is what Lenore wrote. According to Joseph Parrot, he established a grocery store in 1837. This was probably on the west side of State Street near the bridge. And here's a sketch of what the store might have looked like back in 1837. In 1838, Cotton and Henry Parrot, who were sons of Joseph, opened a general store, and they operated the business until 1898. In 1838, Wieners opened a grocery and dry goods store. They were located in what was later Baxter's 5 and 10 cent store. If you remember that, that was down a couple of doors from the corner cafe. Wieners had 3 sons, Charlie, Abe, and Rob, who assisted in the operation of the business. Rob married Ben Oppenheimer, sister in North Manchester, and we all could remember the old Oppenheimer store in Manchester. Around 1873, George Miller opened a grocery store. He had one clerk, Ed Hessen, who was later a postmaster. Sugar, salt, and crackers were shipped in barrels. A coffee grinder was used and was manually operated. Local farmers brought in their eggs and butter to the store in exchange for grocery purchases. Marion has this store located in the building where the subway is now located. From 1886 to 1926, Glassley's grocery store operated in what is now the Tribune News. Harry Glassley was the owner-operator. In later years, Jean and Russell Glassley, his sons, helped in the operation of the business. Essex Grocery Store opened on East Market Street, where Jean Lancaster's Plumbing later was located. Its owner was Theodore Essex Sr., and his son, Theodore Essex Jr., helped him in the business. And if you'll notice, there at the side of the building, is Francis Todd's milk wagon. Tilghman's Grocery, owned by Liza Tilghman, opened in 1915 and was located where the car wash is now. His wife Janie helped him in the business, also assisted by Burl Kyler and Lloyd Myers. Mr. Tilghman also operated a Husker wagon throughout the country. I never saw a Husker wagon, but I've heard a lot about them.
What were they?
They were wagons that had little bits of everything in it,
Oh,
and he would go
okay.
out and the farm ladies would stop him and he would sell them sugar, butter, eggs. Well, of course, if they were in the country, they probably didn't eat eggs, but different things like that. And it was drawn by a horse. It was similar to that milk wagon.
Okay.
Judson West operated a grocery and dry goods store on the northwest corner of State and Mulberry Streets. This is where the subway was, or is. Later, he moved across the street to the KFP building. After his closing, this building was occupied by other businesses. Now, this building is the one that burned in 1943, and then the Kent Theater was built there. And we all know that later burned also. But that's where this store was located. John Kroll and Lloyd Myers entered into an partnership in early 1920s. John Kroll then purchased Lloyd Myers' interest in the store. This store closed in 1931. And this is the store that followed the Judson West. When he moved out, John Kroll, and they moved in. Russell Amber owned and operated a grocery store in the mid-1920s. This was located north of Arnold's Oil and Parts Company. This was the third building from the northwest corner of Wayne and State Street that was torn down to build Arnold's. And I've got a picture, but from the corner down to where Crossroads Restaurant, there was one building right after another, old wooden buildings. And there was even a house in the middle that a man lived in. I'm going to be giving another program on businesses of South Whitley at some time. Clyde Martin's, this M-A-R-T-Z, Mart's, owned a one-room grocery store on Water Street, which is now the home of Helen Beard. I don't know if you remember, you know where Water Street is. It's now apartments. It's a big, long building, but that's where that one was located. In 1924, O.V. Fleck disposed of his Chevrolet agency and bought Fred Klein's Red Front Cash and Carry. This was located in the Tilghman building, the building that was raised where the car wash is located now. Mr. Kennedy purchased the building from Mr. Fleck. An A&P store opened in 1927, operated by Ralph Brower. This business was located on the southwest corner of State and Mulberry Streets. It ceased operation in February 1928. This is where the Crossroad Park is now located. The old Western Auto, as some of you remember, that was the building that it was located in. Andy Bunderson had a two-wheeled cart filled with fresh fish covered with ice. He walked the streets calling out fresh fish, and customers would come to the cart and make their purchases. He weighed them in a pan-type scale which hung from a cross rod on the rear of his cart. This was in operation from 1915 to the early 1920s. Elmer Matson owned and operated a grocery store at the corner of East Market and State Street. And this is where Dr. Lynch has his dentist office now. After his death, a daughter, Marie Calhoun, operated the business. Later, James, a son of Mr. Matson, returned to South Whitley and with his sister Marie continued the operation. Mr. Matson's wife, Franchon, also assisted in the business. Mr. Gipe from Cherubusco assumed the operation of the business for approximately a year, after which it reverted back to the Matson family, and they operated the business until 1964. In 1925, the Hoosier Store, a local chain with headquarters in Fort Wayne, operated this business. It was headed by W.W. Rogers, who later founded the Roger Markets we know today. Harley Waybright was the first manager, and this was Gene's father. Right, Glenn?
Yes.
This store showed a new concept in merchandising, with plywood shelving and merchandise being marked. Shelf tags were also used, with brighter lighting being a new feature. Produce displays were set up on racks, and meat cases were enclosed with ice, being used as a means of refrigeration. This was located in what is now Weber's Antique Shop. Okay, this is the IOOF building. This is a third building south of the Corner Cafe, and if you look up, you can see the remnants of the IOOF building on the clear up top. In 1928, the Kroger Company, seeking to make progress in northern Indiana, purchased the entire chain of the Hoosier Stores, this being 78 outlets. Harley Waybright continued as manager. Mr. Waybright left in 1931. Dallas Blaine assumed the position. He was manager until 1933, at which time Henry Price became manager. The biggest revolution in groceries at this time was the becoming of mechanical refrigerations in 1934. The Kroger Store moved across the street in the building where Arrow Electronics now occupies. This would be the store south of Hip Drugs. Employees included Gene Waybright, Joe Bollinger, Bob Blaine, Marion Kiefer, Woodrow Lynn, Vera Penrod Sherbin, Glee Hathaway Kreider, and high school students during the summer months. And this picture shows Gene Waybright, and then his mother Lou is on the far right. And I'll go back to the other one. This is Harley Waybright, and then the other one, the man on the right, is Russell Demick. In the late 1920s, Marion Green opened a market on the southwest corner of the Columbia and State Streets. This is where the laundromat's located. Marion Green built this building in 1917. He was assisted by Fred Fox and Vance Green. Richard Enos was a part-time employee. Every Friday they sold homemade ring bologna. On this day, you could see many customers lined up waiting to buy this product. Firmer Snyder operated a meat wagon in Tunker before moving to South Whitley in 1908. He began as an employee of Marion Green. Later, he became Mr. Green's partner. When the partnership dissolved, Mr. Green opened a meat market across the street, and this was known, the other one was known as Green and Sons. And this is where, one place that I disagree with Lenore. I think she's just got the names turned around, because Mr. Snyder was the one that moved across the street, because why would Mr. Green leave his own building? So I think this has made a mistake in this. And so Firmer Snyder moved across the street into the building that Bollinger Tin Shop is now located. After the partnership, Mr. Snyder named his business City Meat Market. Mr. Snyder did his own butchering at a slaughterhouse near Commer by the Eel River. He was assisted in his business by his brothers, Ike and Butch Snyder. He made homemade bologna, souse, and head cheese, which was very popular. And probably a lot of you people have never even heard of those. I don't even know if they even make souse and head cheese anymore. There was a walk-in cooler that used ice, which was put in the top part of the cooler. A dill pickle barrel sat back of the cooler out of the front room. In 1928, they added groceries to their meat market. A few years later, in 1937, they joined a newly formed organization called the Independent Grocers Alliance, which we know as IGA. This was done to compete with chain stores which were growing rapidly at that time in this area. Henry Snyder, a son who also assisted with the operation of the family business. Now the one that shows the inside of the store is Firmer Snyder, who is back of the counter, and then the one of those young girls is Bernice Snyder Hawkins, his daughter. The other one that was the outside is Firmer Snyder and Henry Snyder. In 1943, Howard and May McLennan added groceries to their fresh baked goods. This was in the north corner of the Aaron Martin building on the northwest corner of Mulberry and State Street. This is about where the chiropractor is now, and weightlifting place or something. Later, Howard McLennan purchased the building and removed the partitions to enlarge his business. In January 1948, Gene Waybright and Gene Glassley formed a partnership. The business was then named GMG Grocery, GMG Market. This was purchased from Howard and George McLennan. In 1956, Verlin Blaine purchased the interest of Gene Glassley. In June of 1963, Verlin Blaine sold his interest to Gene and Lenore Waybright. From 1969 to 1973, Gene Waybright was the sole owner. On January the 1st of 1973, Lenore Waybright purchased the business from Gene Waybright and was the sole owner until December 4th, 1978. On two different occasions from 1956 to 1974, extensive remodeling was done and new equipment installed. On December 4th, 1978, Gene Kady of Warren, Indiana purchased the business from Lenore Waybright. Mr. Kady then opened a new supermarket located at Eel River Plaza, March 24th, 1981. The first customers of the new business were Frank and Sarah Holler, John and Steve Weber, and Mike Klein. Mr. Kady gradually phased out the operation of the store on Mulberry and State Street, known as GMG Super Value. Progress has been extensive from the early days of food stores. In the summer, vinegar was sold in barrels. The estimated supply was brought in by truck, stored upright, then packed in the storage room. The barrels were opened in a round auger. Into the opening was inserted a wooden vinegar pump. Kerosene was also pumped from a square dispensing tank. Potatoes came in 100-pound bags, which were dumped into a bin and automatically fed down. A scoop was used to weigh in 15-pound bags, and then they were tied with string. Later, bags with handles were used. Sugar came in 100-pound bags and 25-pound bags. For smaller quantities, sugar had to be weighed then into 5 and 10-pound bags. Brown sugar was weighed in smaller amounts. Sacks were tied with string as newer methods of packaging were unknown. Self-service had its beginning in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. At the same time, frozen food merchandising expanded. This was made possible by the advancement of mechanical refrigeration. Every 2 weeks, a salesman called from the A.H. Perfect Company or the Burr Slate Company to take orders. These orders were delivered by the Nickel Plate Railroad to South Whitley. They were then hauled to the stores on horse-drawn dray services. William Hagley and Abe Christ were the two operating dray services at that time. Much of the merchandise was packed in wooden boxes. Later, the merchandise was delivered to their customers by each supplier's own trucking service. Farmers brought their eggs to the grocery stores to be sold to the customers. After 1945, this method was discontinued by the enactment of the new food laws. See, I'm nervous. The eggs were then purchased from the farmers and then packaged by wholesalers. They were then distributed to the grocery stores. Now this ends Lenore's written word, but I did find another article that I want to read a little bit of. This is by Bernice Snyder Hawkins. You remember she was the daughter of Verner Snyder. She wrote this in April of 1987, and it was published in the South Whitley Tribune, and if you want to read the whole thing, you can find it on our newspaper microfilm, or we've got it in our vertical files under groceries. She talked about living over above the store and how much fun it was to stand in the windows to watch what went on in the streets, especially a parade or a band concert. And this is where the bowling or tin shop was, so you can imagine the bandstand was right across the street from her then. I did get to watch the fascinating things that went on in the back room. That was where Dad made all that good stuff. He cooked and made his famous homemade bologna. He made head cheese and a delicious concoction called souse. He placed sliced pickle and 2 slices of lemon in the bottom of a loaf baking pan. He then poured a mixture of pork pieces and a clear broth over this. Then he unmolded it and it looked like Jell-O. I've never found souse quite like he used to make. From Thanksgiving till Christmas, he made mincemeat in big dish pans to sell. And that was back when they used to make mincemeat with meat. A lot of times they don't, but sometimes they do. There's a church here. What church is it?
Who's hamburger?
Okay. Yeah. His customers liked it, and so did I. With the broth, he made Ponhas, a German dish with oatmeal. It's like mice fried, eaten with syrup, and is delicious. Then there was the making of lard. He had a big black kettle he cooked the cracklings in, and then were stirred with a long wooden paddle. Once in a while, he would trust me to do the stirring. It had to be cooked just so, long enough to get the water out, but not enough to scorch it. And I would get to eat the pigtails. Also, the sausage had to be ground and stuffed. My grandmother cleaned the steak casings for him. Outside the store was a smokehouse where the hams, shoulders, jowls, and sides were smoked. can you imagine the smell that would make when he was doing that? There was a big walk-in cooler that worked with real ice. The ice came from the Eel River. Cutting ice and storing it in the ice house with sawdust is another story. The floor behind the counters were covered with sawdust. There was a big butcher block at one side. Above it was a rack holding knives, cleavers, saws, and steel for sharpening the knives. There was a dill pickle barrel. My brothers were the delivery boys. Their bicycles had baskets on them. And then she talks how about in the late 1920s, things started to change with the coming of the chain stores and the food laws. But she goes on in this. But I just thought that was so interesting of how the stores operated and how they looked. And so that was my program for this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. I like looking up everything.
Joyce, do you have any idea how many grocery stores were operating at the same time here in town?
I never checked that out, how many. I've heard that there's might be 5 at one time.
I'm sitting here trying to count and keep track of it.
Yeah.
There was one that...
There was a lot more that I don't even know about. I mean...
There was one called Abrams, was it? There back by the school, the dairy bar.
Yeah, that was a dairy bar.
Yeah.
That was the
Did
dairy
they have
bar.
groceries and stuff?
That's a
too?
50.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before,
Yes,
when I
yes,
was
sir.
a child.
I don't know if anybody remembers the Smith Grocery Store, Columbia, or,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Tim Kyler, his grandpa owned the blacksmith shop.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot. There was one that I've heard about, Biddle. I've heard about a lot of them, but I haven't been able to find any information on them. If anybody has any information on anyone, I'd be sure glad to get it into our
Patty's
our
still got
files.
Bateman's Meat Locker there too. They sold some stuff, I think, a few
It
things.
used to be right there by Carol's.
Behind Carol's.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the alley there, I remember that.
Yeah.
My great grandfather built that building.
Did he really?
Yeah, Harmon Warner. Yeah. He also built the building where the Ideal Dress Shop was in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he built the house behind it too, behind the locker plant, that big house, because my aunt and uncle lived in it. They ran the auto shop that used to be in that. That's what Grandpa built that for, was for my uncle's auto shop. So, yeah, yeah.
I live right outside Columbia City, and we had a huckster in the 50s that would come to our house. And my dad worked for the railroad, and he was going about most of the time. And we really relied on that huckster coming. I mean, he had a little refrigerator there in his truck, and he came like twice a week.
Oh, that would have been interesting. And it was probably looked just like that milk wagon. I mean, they went out in the country and delivered milk too out in those.
What kind of population does South Whitley have then, do you know?
I could find out. Easy.
I can look. Thank you.
Any other questions for Joyce?
Like I say, I'm just taking this as what I'm trying to find in the files and newspapers and so forth. And
All right, let's give Joyce a hand and then we'll bring Jean out. Joyce works really hard on these programs and I appreciate it so much. So, Jean, or Glenn, I'm sorry. I was thinking about Jean's, Glenn.
Well, that was a really good presentation. I learned a lot more than I probably could tell you tonight. There was so much stuff here that I really had never heard and didn't know about the history of this. But no, I did want to just say a few things here. I can pass these around. I found some.
Look at those prices.
Those are older ads.